Evening all on Play Chess and streaming to YouTube. Okay, I thought for the next few weeks there'll be a nice series. I think it's going to be an epic series on Bobby Fischer in the 1970 Palma de Mallorca tournament. This was an interzonal tournament. Palma de Mallorca, Fischer didn't directly qualify for. He was given his place by a fellow American player, and about this tournament, it was held from November the 9th to December the 12th, 1970. It was the last interzonal held as a one-section round robin. The tournament swelled to 24 players, and so further expansion, which was on the way, future changes had to be inevitable. Okay, so there was the usual mix of super grandmasters, strong players, not quite at the peak in either direction, and outsiders. So I thought we could look at Fischer's games in the tournament, where he had, by modern times, an incredible FIDE rating performance. It must have been over 2,800. He had a massive score in this tournament. And, you know, some of the games I don't think have been covered that much, actually, by commentators yet on YouTube or elsewhere. Some are very, very complex. And I think annotators tend to look at just decisive result games. But some of the draws, when we're talking about Fischer and we talk about the draws, they're very interesting fighting draws. They're not boring draws. I think we're going to see that in some of the draws as well, this fighting content. So the first game to look at, round one, I believe, the 9th of November 1970, against Robert Hubner, who I think is a top German grandmaster at the time, and who played a lot against Kasparov actually later. So e4 from Fischer, and Hubner decided to use the Khan c6, so a solid opening choice from black. Okay, so here we see d3. Not the most ambitious looking move ever to play d3, but still it's got some potential. In Fischer's youth, he would often employ a coiled spring setup against different openings like the Sicilian, where white would aim to fianchetto like this. It's an easy way to play the opening. So nothing too ambitious here, not revealing his cards to other players about very specific technical lines against the Khan. He just employs this rather easy to play setup. So knight d2. Okay, and we'll actually put on live book here and also add a kibitzer. Okay, so I'm going to add a kibitzer here. Stockfish. Okay. So in this position, g6 was chosen. Also, you know, very popular here is e5. According to live book, so e5 or g6, but g6 was chosen. The knight goes here. Bishop g7. Now g3. So it's a modest setup from Fischer here in round one. This cold spring kind of setup. So e5, bishop g2. Now the knight deploys to e7, so not getting in the way of the f pawn. That's flexible if black later wants to play for f5. But also later, you know, maybe any pin on g5 doesn't look likely at the moment. There's f6, so having the freedom of that f pawn, it looks like a nice setup for black. Both sides castle. Okay, so it's a standard looking position. Rook e1 now. And already, actually, white is potentially threatening now e takes to put pressure on that e5 pawn. And black, because of this, decides, well, this is the most popular move, to close the position with d4. Usually black does do this, d4, not any other move. Knight d7 is also quite popular, but d4 is actually the most common. Okay, so now we see the move a4, as if the c4 square is going to be nice. Without being kicked with b5, we can put pressure on e5. Now we see c5, knight c4. So it looks a little bit, in fact, like a reverse King's Indian defence. Black's pawns look very much like the Petrosian system in particular, with this early advance here. So black's got the space advantage, but there's pressure on e5, so that has to be addressed. Knight bc6, and now white plays c3 here. An interesting choice. What else? It's difficult to consider playing for f4, f5 here, moving like that. It seems a bit slow. So actually, c3 seems quite nice. If c takes later, you could imagine there might be a plan of bishop d2, b4, b5 to put more pressure on e5. That sort of plan might be possible. So we see the move c3, bishop e6, and now c takes d4. And black actually voluntarily gives up the light squared bishop, which is actually also an engine choice, funny enough. They're almost about equal, taking here or taking here. From an engine perspective, almost about equal. Some weight now is being given to bishop takes. So d takes. And you can see black, in theory, has got this passed pawn, but there's a blockade point on d3. If we ever got in, say, knight e1 to d3, that would be a nice blockade. And then later, you could imagine something like this. We could liberate the bishop along that diagonal. So it's not without its bite, this setup here for white. Interestingly, a very sharp move was played here. You might consider a quiet move. I mean, let's consider a quiet move from white. Say bishop d2. I think black is doing quite well here. Black has suppressed the b4 break. It's good to suppress the b4 break. This position looks as though it's nothing, it's no big deal for white. It's dead equal from an engine point of view. So it's interesting here that a sharp move is chosen. If we play the bishop here, then maybe it's just kicked. And what are we going to do? Give up the dark square bishop? If we go here, black could even consider a space gain, and then maybe celebrate the e5 square. This could get quite unpleasant actually for white. Black does seem to have a very comfortable game with a strong central pass pawn. So Fischer livens things up here. I don't know if you had a look at this position. If you had this position as white, you've got to choose these moments where you don't want to be run out of counterplay. So if white really is faced with prospect of low counterplay with bishop d2, is there enough of you to ask this yet, or should we just wait until there's more of you? Okay. The sharp move played is e5. Slightly weakening that pawn. Okay, it's protected by the rook and thing. And it introduces almost straight away introduces e6. And it was also bishop f4 just to overprotect that e5 point. So yes, okay. So we see queen d7 here, and now h4, as though there might be an interest in either h5 or just bishop f4 without any prospect in sight for any g5 kick later on. But black livens things up here considerably in this position. It's an interesting position where that maybe if black wanted to play very solidly, maybe just rook e8 is okay, and maybe this is a target at some point in the future. However, with h4, it's difficult to arrange this. It would be nice to do this, but it doesn't. It seems out of prospect here. So black might have to be happy with this sort of position, and it seems okay for black. Objectively, this looks okay. For example, a5, and here this looks as though black should be okay. But black committed to a very sharp sequence now by playing a very committal move d3. So is this pawn going to be vulnerable? Why move this pass pawn so quickly? Is it going to be surrounded? Well, one idea now is an immediate, like knight b4 to c2. The pawn does support the c2 square. Okay, so we see now bishop d2. So if knight b4, I think that would be chopped off actually. It might be chopped off here. this wasn't played. So queen b3, and we can look forward to surrounding this pawn. If, say, a5 rook here, we're surrounding that pawn. I think, yeah, this is going to be better for white. Knight g5 with e6 as well as the potential. There's a lot of pressure here. So black, he didn't go for knight b4. He played rook a8. Okay, rook a8, and we see actually bishop c3. And here, knight b4 now, actually, a slightly different position. So is bishop takes b4 as effective here? On bishop takes b4 in this position, c takes, let's go with, say, queen b3 or queen d2 here. Queen b3, I think black should be okay here. Knight c6. It's not so easy to surround this pawn with the rook on d8. This particular position, queen f5, black could be troublesome with this pawn, with this d2 even, because there's resources here like bishop h6 now. So this gets very interesting very quickly. This sharp game continuation, it wasn't played. So we go back. So knight, bishop takes b4 wasn't played here, so that's interesting. But knight d4, very shocking looking move. Knight d4, using this kind of potentially loose knight on b4. Yes, it looks like a strange sort of move. So what does black do? Well, black plays now rook fe8. Now e6 is actually quite interesting to play e6 here. If black had played something like this, I'm not sure. Well, pressure on d4 now. This position looks to be in black's favour. That actual c2 square looks a bit of a pain actually. This kind of position looks interesting for black, even if takes. It's an interesting scenario anyway. So, okay, knight d4. What does black do against this knight d4? He really doesn't want to take this surely, because then bishop takes b4 and we're surrounding this pawn. So that would be pretty daft. So rook fe8, but it invites this e6, which is played, and it looks like quite a nasty move to face. F takes e6, knight takes e6. Okay, so white is threatening knight takes g7 and knight takes c5. Black plays bishop takes c3. We have b takes, and now in this position, with the rook and knight attacked, black plays knight c2. So forking both rooks. It gets very sharp, this game. Very, very sharp. And we're going to transition more to an endgame from this position. So one pair of rooks is in effect swapped off. Knight takes, leaving the rook's forked. Knight takes. Okay. So here, black has got a better pawn structure. The bishop, though, looks pretty good on the diagonal. These pawns look a bit wretched. We see king g7 here. So taking the king onto the dark squares away from the bishop. Rook e1. And here, if black plays a move like knight f5, I suspect this d5 square is a bit of a pain. In fact, the immediate bishop d5, and then actually, yeah, we're on the pawn here. This is unpleasant. Even if black takes this one, we get this centre pawn, and this might be a little bit more unpleasant than the game continuation. Okay, so we see this move knight g8, so that knight still can exert influence on that critical d5 point, if needed, at some point soon. Here, we see the a pawn is also hanging now. Before, well, with the knight holding e7, in this position, it wasn't really possible. So knight g8 is actually making the a pawn hanging. So bishop d5, surrounding this one, swapping a pawn for d pawn. What else does black do here? His d pawn is a goner. Okay, so queen takes a4, which gives black, of course, a passed a pawn. Queen takes d3. And black now challenges this centre file. This could be tricky if it's not challenged. As an example, well, black played rook e8. Let's say black doesn't challenge the central file. Queen d7. I think this is going to be nice for white. Queen e3, for example. We hit this pawn. If b6, white dominates and controls that e file. There's balancing factors here. So, okay, we got the doubled pawns. But this control of the e file, I think, compensates there. And black's got potential king safety issues, I think. Say h5. So white is now threatening h6 check, even if that's a pawn sack to get to the 7th rank. Here, it would start to be tricky. Very tricky. For example, h6. This gets nasty quickly. For example, here, bishop e6. It can get nasty quickly, basically, with white having numerous threats. So yeah, black has got to be careful about this e file being dominated. So we see this cautious rook e8. Even if it means a pawn sacrifice, these are double pawns anyway. So this pawn can handle these two, and black still has this outside a pawn. We see the rooks coming off and white winning that pawn. So technically, yes, white's a pawn up, but this extra pawn isn't such a big deal. What might be a greater deal is this bishop. Seems quite nice on the diagonal use of the d5 square. We see knight f6, queen d6. And here, from an engine point of view, actually, white has more than one pawn advantage after this move queen d7 now, because white is actually, well, he's on this c5 pawn, and black plays this very resourceful queen d7 here. Okay, so indirectly defending c5, and white now, I think, slipped up slightly, might have slipped up slightly in playing queen a6. Although there's nothing to fear from the checks because we're controlling this diagonal, it seems that possibly queen b8 is quite an interesting move to consider. For example, like this, queen a8, but it's a tricky position. Are things held in balance here? Probably things that they might be in balance here. Black's got that past a pawn. White's double pawns are not such a big deal. It will be difficult to see how white makes progress, even though technically the engine is saying this is better for white. I can't see it. The evaluation, I don't think, is going anywhere fast. I don't think there's any way to increase the advantage that easily here. But Fischer's continuation was queen a6. And this leads to an interesting tactical sequence now involving c4 and f2. We see queen f7 as though this pawn's going to be traded for the c pawn, but actually there's something very cunning here. And when we have a pin in chess, the attacking players are very, very cunning with pins, and white is walking into a pin here by playing queen takes a7. Now, in principle, it's a bad idea. Technically, the engines hate this. It's indicating equality immediately after queen takes a7. You see that pin on the bishop. Forget about the c pawn for a moment. There's a pin on the bishop there. If white played bishop f3, this is interesting. It also keeps the knight out of the g4 square. Maybe, after king g2, this is securing the position down a bit to keep the pressure on. Here, this is an interesting position, just keeping the pressure. But again, it's not quite so clear how white ever makes progress Maybe the position is equal by this stage. Okay, but this is a committal decision that Fischer plays here after Queen f7. He walks into this pin. Can you guess what black played here? Very resourceful move, which guarantees equality. If I give you 20 seconds to come up with a move here. So black to play, very resourceful move to the credit of Robert Hubner. Black to play. What would you play with black? If I give you 20 seconds, have a sip of tea while waiting. There's a way of getting, I think, minus 1,000 points, by the way, if you get a wrong move here. A particularly disastrous move. So black to play, yeah. Mac, Veen, anyone on play chess? So black to play. So we got one suggestion, we got two. Okay, very good. Very good. Okay. Let's have a look at this position. Now, here, I think, runs into bishop d5 check. Ouch. So minus 1,000 points for that. Yeah. We've got this pin. So how do we use that? Actually, yeah, knight. So we've got this choice of either knight e4 or knight g4 to use the pin. But the one that's more effective in this particular position seems to be knight e4. Because we not only use the pin and we're hitting f2, the knight can return here and help win a piece, win the bishop. It's quite dramatic, this game, actually. Quite brutal, really. If we played knight g4 instead, in this position, actually f3 is possible. And say knight e3, queen takes c5, and black's just doing badly here. Yes, pawns down. This position, knight e5, we can just take here. And again, it's not very nice for black, this position. Just 2 pawns down there. So the way to make sure this is a draw is to play knight e4. So it's got this knight d6 in mind. So f3. What else? What else does white play? He doesn't want to lose the bishop that's pinned. So, but yeah, he's losing the bishop here. Queen takes c5. We have an interesting dynamic situation now emerging, where the engine suggests this is an equal position, though, despite black being a knight up. We have check and then king f2, check, and here actually h5, just to dissolve the pawns. If you're a piece down, good to dissolve the pawns in principle. This is equal now. Apparently black might have tried knight c5. I mean, from an engine point of view, it's dead equal after the game continuation. This move knight c5 instead. It's difficult to see how black will be making progress, actually. So let's just have a look at the game continuation. Check. There's multiple checks, and it ended here on move 44. So, you know, actually it was quite a dramatic draw. I mean, I hope you all agree. It was, you know, it had a bit of high drama in it, in this draw. You know, it wasn't just a boring draw. I don't think anyone's actually ever covered this game on YouTube. I think people just like looking at games someone won. I just thought it was interesting. You know, quite violent in a way, with this d3 and, you know, ideas of coming to c2. So knight d4, I thought very interesting move, knight d4. It's actually the engine's top suggestion as well. Knight d4 is an engine move from Stockfish at depth 22. So Fischer's playing a bit like a computer. He doesn't need to cheat with a computer or anything. He plays like a computer by this stage at 1970, knight d4. If he did anything else, maybe, you know, black is doing well. We didn't consider, say, knight g5. If knight c2 here, e6 again. But black might actually be doing okay with this. Anyway, so knight d4, interesting move. I think it's got an advantage over the other one. Here, let's not go too deeply into this. Let's just quickly review the game, pardon me. So, a strange tactical game here. Some simplification, and then Fischer goes into this pin, perhaps knowing he's going to be a piece down for the pawns, but it's an equal position. Now, if you thought this game was exciting, the next three are mega exciting compared to it, actually. Okay, so let's go on to round 2. So in round 2, Fischer was playing Smyslov. So the Russians had really done good training for Fischer on all the interzonals he's played in the past since 1959. 1959 candidates. Yeah, the Russians started training Fischer quite deeply from 1959 in these sort of the high profile tournaments. But Smyslov had only beaten Fischer, I think, once, actually. I think according to ChessGames.com, I was looking at the stats today, Smyslov's only beaten Fischer once. I think it was something like 4-1, not including the draws. So Smyslov playing white, Fischer black. We're going to flip the board. So c4, English opening. And honestly, Smyslov is someone I've kind of neglected on the channel. I think the reason is his style was a bit often on the dull side. He's often simplifying quite quickly into these endings, trying to win with small advantages in endgames. So it's not really the dynamic school of chess which I like to explore generally when looking at games. But anyway, we'll see in this game that sometimes Smyslov, although he's brilliant at endgames, if in the middle game he doesn't do that well, he'll have a poxy endgame which even he can't do anything about. So this might be an example of that. So g6, Fischer is playing black and plays g6. Now already this is a very flexible move. I think Smyslov would also use this move against the English opening, not even committing knight f6. Very flexible response to play g6 here. Knight c3, bishop g7, g3, c5. So symmetrical, you'll see it's completely symmetrical here. b3. Okay, so white simply has this plan. This is the mega wet lettuce plan of bishop b2 and to exchange off the dark squared bishops. Yeah, it's not a very ambitious plan, because if you think fundamentally about this, you'll end up with a knight on b2, which is not particularly brilliant, and maybe, you know, black's going to be playing in the center after that, but we'll see the game. Okay, so e6, bishop b2, knight g7. So this knight a4, just inviting the exchange of bishops. And already actually the engine evaluation has gone into black's favour after this move. A normal move, an attacking move might be h4 actually. A dynamic aggressive move h4. Even that, you know, if black castled here, then maybe h5, and this isn't so bad. This is ambitious play from white if white had a different style of play. Yeah, so because the knight's here, it's not actually covering that h5 so well. So h4, h5 is actually more effective than usual. But instead we have this mega wet lettuce plan of exchanging the dark squared bishops, which Fischer obliges. He takes on b2. After castles. Okay, is black to be depressed because he's without his dark squared bishop? I'm not sure. So e3, d5. It already looks as though black has either the nice d4, d4, or even consider taking here to use this d3 weakness somehow later. White takes on d5, and now we see knight takes d5, knight e2, b6. Now white perhaps should have taken the opportunity to simply castle, but I think he does stand slightly worse. b6 can be used for bishop a6 here, and this queen can come to this diagonal quite comfortably with tempo soon. So I think if anyone's better, it's black already. This doesn't look so bad for black, even without the absence of the dark squared bishop. This position here, I think one thing about this which might make white passive is this d-file pressure coming up on the pawn if white's not careful. So for example, it looks as though white's potentially passive here, but yeah, we get an altogether different continuation here after b6 because white played d4, and without castling, it's usually considered a fundamental rule respected by many players to not indulge in active operations before you've castled. Yeah, and this is a kind of active operation if it is to try and win the c5 pawn, and the violation of that rule can lead to backfires tactically, and here Fischer is quite keen potentially to gambit given that white's king is still in the centre. He plays a very aggressive move, bishop a6, and we see now d takes. There's no need for black to actually routinely capture here. This is a loose piece. The bishop seems really good, and there's a potential for this use of b4 for d3, but this loose piece in particular is used now with queen f6. So what is black brewing up here? It starts to get sharp quickly. If rook b1, just before going into this, by the way, this would be a proxy response to just recapture here. I think white could just castle and it would be bearable. But the way this has been played out here, Fischer doesn't want to give white the chance even to castle, ideally, in the ideal world. So he plays queen f6, so he's on the knight. If rook b1, I think this fails tactically. Already white would be blown to bits on rook b1. Rook a d8, and this is just terrible for white, this position, because of this knight takes e3. What does white actually do here? What does he do? This, we're going to end up with disaster here, just losing a piece maybe like this. So queen f6 is troublesome. Knight c4 is played, probably the best move. But there's a sharp move in this position, and maybe many of you have seen this game before, I expect. But a sharp move is played in this position. What would you play here with black if I gave you 20 seconds starting from now? So black to play. So black to play. Right, so Kite Bart on Playchess has mentioned knight here. Right. Sorry, knight here. You said knight here. That's interesting to consider. Some other suggestions. Yes, the suggestions are quite diverse here. Someone's mentioned b5. No, I don't think b5. Rook d8 is also interesting, surely. Let's have a look at rook d8. That might be a good move. Hang on a sec. Queen c1. It might be. It's still okay for black. Black hasn't lost the advantage that much with such a move. And probably now take here or knight e5. So this position might be okay. Can use this pin. Rook d8 is not a terrible move. Mind you, b takes is not a terrible move either. No, knight c3 is played. So it plays havoc with potentially loose rook on a1 now, and white's casting rights. Oh, knight takes e3 has been mentioned. I think this is can't be right, can it? Just f takes. If here we keep an eye on the rook, we play queen b1 or queen c1. If here, this looks dangerous though. On knight d3, it does look dangerous with the king not able to castle. Knight f4 to protect d3. g5, white could castle. It gets hairy. This position, apparently, if takes here, black's still better with knight d3. Apparently c takes or c6, technically, is okay for white. So that's an interesting continuation, but it's okay. Yeah, knight takes even knight takes e3. That's phenomenal. That even knight takes e3 is tricky. Yeah, but yeah, knight c3 was played, and white actually played knight takes c3. So after queen takes c3, if queen d2, queen takes a1. So white loses casting rights. But we've got a loose knight on c6 here. But interestingly, in this round and in the next two rounds, I'd like you to keep a careful note about something. That Fischer likes getting rooks to the 7th rank very quickly. And if he has to use a pawn sack or two, once he gets rooks to the 7th rank, it often spells disaster for the opponents. A rook on the 7th rank statistically is hitting a lot of pawns, yeah? And so I just want you to make a note of that, not just for this game, but for the next two rounds, if we get time to cover the next two. This could be a long session. So rook fd8, queen c1, bishop takes c4, puncturing the d2 square for a potential invasion later on d2. Check. Now with this knight hanging here, rook ac8 is played. White is material up, a pawn, isn't he, in this position? 4, 5, 6, 5. But it's a difficult position. This c4 looks like a goner with knight e5 coming up. Queen b2. The rook's not connected. Seems a little bit bad. Now knight a5, trying to get the pawn back. One thing to consider here, h4 was played in this position. Let's have a quick look at this. Knight takes c4. This position should be okay for black. It's actually pretty dangerous after knight e5. We've got things like rook c2. It's pretty dangerous, and you can imagine a knight d3 in conjunction with that. f2 will be a problem. Okay, so white's not that greedy here. He plays h4, which extends the scope with the rook, and maybe there's an idea, naughty ideas coming up with the fianchettoed queen. Knight takes c4, so equal on material again. Queen f6. Now Fischer doesn't mind the endgame transition here. And this, I think this is a really common weakness in many players. I think. I say that I'm 212 ECF. I don't know if anyone's aware of that. That's quite good. From my perspective, this is a weakness. The endgame transitions, the assessment of endgame transitions, people can be good positionally, tactically, but the endgame transition here, to understand this endgame, it's the nuances here, because you might think, well, intuitively the bishop here is quite good in this endgame if the queens came off, but actually it's the rook on the 7th. It causes a lot of problems, the rook on the 7th, statistically. And the endgame transition here, I think, is correctly assessed in black's favour with queen f5. I mean, the engines like queen f5 as well. If we get this endgame transition here, we get a fast rook on the 7th, which white really hasn't... No, the problem with the disconnected rooks, they can't challenge this rook to the 7th. And if white bells out of the queen exchange, it doesn't matter now. Rook d2, we're on f2 here as well. This gets rather painful. So white's really committed for this queen exchange here. So we get this queen exchange, and g takes is played. Engine suggests this might be just as good. E takes. The key point is we're going to get this rook to the 7th now. So out of all of that, with it being temporarily a pawn down, then equal on pawns, we have this position where the rooks are more active and able to get to the 7th rank, while white rooks are still parked in their original positions. h5, no. Now this is an idea of activating with rook h4, ridiculous as it seems, but if that's a way to get the rook out, that might be an idea. Rook d2, rook c1. So yeah, rook h4 looks as though that could be handy here, because you can imagine b5 a4. This could be a target with that pin. So you don't want all this pressure all of a sudden on c4. Well, you've got to be able to cope with that. Rook c5 seems against that. Rook c5. At least the rook is supported now by the pawn. And it means, yeah, this rook h4 isn't so troublesome. It can now be responded to with knight e5. So the pawn is holding the rook. The knight is able to come to either to d3. Well, actually, this is threatened anyway immediately. But the knight has got good squares. Now, does white want another rook coming to the 7th? If we consider rook b1, this surely is painful, too painful to allow both of them like this. This is just pathetic. This looks pathetic to just lose the a2 pawn. Whoops. If we just play this, we just lose the a2 pawn. White doesn't want to play a pawn down with a passed b pawn. So yeah, white plays this, and this position here, this rook is still more active than this, although it's crawled out of the game creatively. So, but black has this asset, this c pawn now, and the knight is actually quite comfortable here. Is h6 a threat though? Maybe for this cheeky stuff to try and mate the king. Fischer doesn't think so here. He pushes the pawn c4. Now white plays this h6, so there's a mate in 2 threat. Okay, that's dealt with king f8. The king can come out like this. Check, but it's leaving h7 behind. Doesn't really matter. We've got this passed c pawn, so we've got to get white tries to get behind the c pawn, and now loses this pawn. So rook takes, but bishop f1. Black's a pawn up. This looks like a winning endgame position now. After king g2, I don't think this even helped, but it's a miserable position. If rook c5, then king f6. And what's happening here is that maybe even king g6, when the rook moves, would be useful to try and hit this pawn. So it's a miserable position to play, I think. Here it looks quite miserable. Now we see knight g4, so dual threats. Knight takes e3 with the pin, but also just c3, just move this one. Okay, So if bishop takes c4, that just loses a piece. Knight takes e3. We're going to be winning that piece. So king g1. But the c pawn, is attacked. So if we took with the knight, then it's quite nice for black. Black's got an advantage which isn't so easy to completely ruin. So rook takes f2 is a good move here, as well as c3. Fischer chooses rook takes f2. So he's fragmented these pawns, and he's giving up the c4 pawn now. We see rook f3, trying to win another pawn again to be a pawn up. Well, he's already a pawn up, to be 2 pawns up. Okay, now knight takes h6, getting rid of that one. It's a miserable position for white. He plays on a little bit here. Knight e5. Rook b8. After bishop h1, white resigns here in this position. Yes, it's a live broadcast, yes. Hi there. White resigns here. Let's have a look at this position. So it's 2 pawns up for black. If rook b3, okay, if king g2, knight g4, this is looking absolutely miserable. But let's play another move here or two. E5, we've got this passed pawn. It's looking clear enough. We'll use the passed e pawn. That'll be decisive. So I think, yeah, white resigns when it's totally lost. Doesn't want to play on here. It was an interesting game because white's unadventurous opening led to Fischer playing very, very actively to sack a pawn and get this very powerful rook on the 7th. So even though there was an endgame transition later, black's active rook on the 7th, white was quite resourceful to get the rook out like this, though, it's got to be said. But the active rook on the 7th here, this simplification is still in black's favour. That active rook is doing all the damage. This c pawn had to be stopped. The rook had to really get behind this rook, this pawn. So that was threatening mate. King came out. And here, yeah, these pawns are now targeted. So black was always in the driving seat. And it's very nice that the knight was on at h6 here, otherwise that pawn might have been dangerous. So I thought that is a really fantastic game from Fischer in round 2. What do you guys think? Have you all seen this game before? So that was outplaying Smyslov in an endgame, but you've got to have an advantage going into the endgame. Doesn't matter how good you are at endgames, and the advantage going in was, from Fischer's perspective, he had a lot of trump cards there going into that endgame. Okay, so round 3 coming up. In round 3, Fischer was playing white against a fellow American player called William Addison, who I think swore if he didn't do well in this tournament to qualify, he'd become a lawyer or something. So William Addison, after e4 from Fischer, played a surprising opening, Scandinavian centre counter d5. Nimzowitsch had great scorn for this opening, using it to demonstrate you shouldn't be losing time in the opening because it's like a race. You've got to get your bits out quickly, etc. And it doesn't help. So e takes, queen takes d5, knight c3. And usually in live book, by the way, I think queen a5 is far more popular than just going back to d8. Nowadays, we've got over 5,000 games with queen a5. There's 3,471, by the way, with queen d6. So this has become a popular move as well in recent years. A bit cheeky. But going back all the way, 596. It never reached more than 1,000 games, this idea of going back with the queen. So d4, knight f6. Now the usual move in this position is knight f3 by quite a bit, 238 gains. Fischer played bishop c4, and here, okay, bishop c4. Black has some options, c6, a6, bishop g4 has even been played. If bishop g4, maybe white can transpose back with knight f3 or play a bit differently with f3. Okay, so bishop c4, bishop f5 though was played. This is quite a rare move, very rare considering, yeah, c6 is the most popular. So with bishop f5, something wrong about this move already actually. This is why I want to mention it. Why do players with black in this position often play c6 or a6 or bishop g4? Something wrong with queen f5. And you know, is it really tying down white in somewhat, you know, to either retreat the bishop for c2 or not? I don't think, you know, Fischer didn't think so. He's got a lead in development, and actually he like plays this game like Paul Morphy. This game is conducted like Paul Morphy. He's prepared to sacrifice pawns, or Alekhine also sacrificed pawns a lot in the openings to get huge initiatives and huge initiative. So Fischer in this position plays a surprising move actually already just at move 6. I don't know how many of you have seen this game. This is quite a famous game. Can you guess what white played here? Because it really leads to an enormous initiative. So white to play here. What would you play in this position? And I think it's good to have your thinking cap on in the opening, because this is actually quite a novelty move. So how would you punish it? It's a novelty move in this position, bishop f5. Black's already violated, you know, some principles of development, yeah? So who cares about the c2 pawn? All right. We could play a proxy move like bishop b3 and let black get an ideal setup like this, and black would have a very solid position, problem bishop sorted out, very, very nice, and will one day later play for c5, and black's going to be much better potentially in a lot of positions. No, white actually plays queen f3, so offering c2. At the moment this double attack has to be addressed. I think e6 is a bit of a risky gambit. If black goes on the gambit, it's, I don't know, that's interesting as well though. But yeah, black plays this move, maybe it's the best move probably, almost, to play e6, not what was played. e6 giving up the b7 pawn is probably technically better, at least from an engineering point of view, but queen c8 was played. And of course, if we take this pawn, there's going to be, it looks as though that's setting up for a backfire on the c file with the queen on c8 here. So Fischer doesn't really care about this c2 pawn. He plays bishop g5. Okay, also something else to consider, by the way. Queen takes d4. I think this is horrible because queen takes f5 is not good. That wouldn't be a good game for an interzonal. It would be embarrassing. He could probably go home after this game if it was like that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, sorry, yeah. Okay, so queen c8. Yeah, but probably best is e6. All right. To give up the b7 pawn with some development. Okay, so we have this bishop g5, bishop takes c2, rook c1, bishop g6. So an enormous initiative in the hands of the attacking player. is fantastic stuff already. This position looks as though black should fall apart. Knight GE2, knight BD7, knight castles, E6. Now here it looks as though knight F4 could actually be useful for something like this. Even if bishop E7, I wonder, almost, or D5. But Fischer actually played a more committal move immediately. He played bishop takes F6, so damaging black's pawn structure potentially. If knight takes F6, I think D5 is good here. Black isn't quite quick enough, I think, to castle. If bishop E7, then check is really annoying, and this could fall apart quickly. This starts to get horrible. If castling here, this is a fascinating variation. There's a tactical computer move here. Well, there's two computer moves. Knight takes G6. It looks more straightforward for E7 check, offering the queen. So if HG, this looks disgusting. Queen H3 or Queen E3. But both of it, this looks like a wreck. So yeah, it looks as though D5 has great potential on knight takes F6. D5. I don't know what black does here. E5, knight B5, and we're going to be torturing C7 soon. Bishop E7, knight takes C7 check actually, and we can win the queen. So yeah, black played this ugly looking move, and maybe that's some useful background now why he played this ugly looking move. G takes F6. I think he wanted to make D5 less effective, but D5 is still effective here. D5 is played, and after E5 we've got this gaping hole on F5, so a knight can slip into the F5 in theory. So it looks horrible. Bishop B5. So now bishop E7, knight G3, and if black castles here, I think H4, H5 is dangerous. If castles, H4 is strong here, to go like this. H5. What does black do in this position? This looks like big trouble. This position here, because also this knight's potentially loose to this check. So for example, if H6, I think we just play this, and for example check here, we get that knight. So black must be frightened by this prospect of H4, H5. So he played actually A6, and the bishop just retreated. White would welcome the exchange of light square bishops. That F5 square just looks so juicy for a knight. Queen D8. Again, if castling, I think there's a problem here with just maybe H4 is good, but there might even be stronger here. Just knight here, and we've got things like D6 on the way as well. Okay, so Queen D8, and now we see this H4, H5. Now this F5 square looks tasty. In fact, a bishop occupied F5 here. This looks very nice. So black seems to have a totally miserable opening. Although a pawn up, it's just a revolting position. Knight B6. And to accelerate things further, is D5 really a problem? White could have just protected it actually, and it has a clear advantage. But Fischer went to sacrifice another pawn with knight here, so putting more pressure on black. With this and maybe D6 to follow. And black, I don't know, he thought maybe there's nothing better to do than win another pawn here. If black tries to construct a blockade, say on the d pawn with knight C8, How painful will this be? Say knight, it's a disgusting position, basically. If queen takes d5, let's rule things out. Then rook takes c7, the rook crashing to the 7th. So we've got all sorts of ideas now, like taking and then, well, all sorts of ideas. That's horrible. So if knight c8, well, knight takes d5 is played. If knight c8, d6, this is horrible. Knight takes here. Although 2 pawns down, I think black's about to be exploding here. Rook g8, we can take here. Knight c5 is strong. So we've got things like queen b3. That's just revolting as well. Say this, knight e6. It's a revolting position. With the rooks not connected, the king in the centre, it's well worth the 2 pawns. So anyway, knight takes d5 was played. Rook fd1. Now threatening immediately, rook takes, queen takes, knight f6 check to win the queen. So it's supported with c6. And what does Fischer play here? This is amazing, but I think there's a key thing about rooks on the 7th. Getting a rook to the 7th rank actually is a really interesting concept in these 3 rounds. After round 1, rounds 2, 3, 4, a rook on the 7th is an interesting concept here. But what does white play here? What would you play here with white? If I gave you 20 seconds from this position. So white play here. So you're 2 pawns down. I'll just spell that out. You're 2 pawns down here. What would you play here? By the way, yeah, if you like the video, it's appreciated, because even before I started this broadcast, there were 4 dislikes. So some people that don't like Fischer or something, yeah, if you could balance out with some likes, that would be much appreciated. By the way, in this break while I'm asking this move. As an aside, by the way, I read today something I wasn't sure I've read before about Fischer. At the 1959 Interzonal, Tao had won it because he was on the way to winning the 1960 World Championship. Tao arranged a party inviting all the visitors, grandmasters, and someone was saying about Tao's father would be really proud of him, and Fischer burst into tears and left the party. And then years later, I think the author discovered that Fischer's father had left him when he was about 2 years old. So he was distraught by this, about Tao's dad being proud. He was distraught. So I think Fischer's sense of abandonment made him a very determined chess player, and he became unstable after, mentally unstable. And a lot of people don't like to study Fischer because of his insanity later. But I think he had an unstable childhood to start off with, and probably it made his determination and focus on chess easier, that he just ruled out everything else as a distraction, anything not chess. But yeah, there's some interesting stories in this book, The Russians versus Fischer, which gives some insight into Fischer actually. But anyway, so in this position, knight c3. So it's getting a pawn back, but there's a rook infiltration coming to the 7th rank potentially as well. I don't know really what black does without the connected rooks at the moment, without making white's position better and better with each move. So queen b6. And now it looks as though a normal player might just play knight takes d5 here. This is okay for an advantage. This position is okay. but it's not, you know, totally crushing. So I guess if I asked you, no, I'm not going to carry on asking you. Okay, no, maybe. What would you play here? This position, if you're not content with knight takes d5, what would you play? You're 2 pawns down. Are you content just to get 1 pawn back? Or what? What would you play in this position? White to play here. We're near to the end of the game, so this might not take 10 years to get to the end of the game here. White to play here. And I think the principle which holds actually round 2, 3, 4, as I say, rook on the 7th is such a powerful concept, not just in the end games where statistically pawns on the 7th, but here a rook on the 7th would be an ideal thing as well for king safety issues, to get more pressure against black's king. Yeah, white actually sacks the exchange. So 2 pawns down, he sacks the exchange. And you'll notice here, there's a fantastic knight, obviously, on you can try and win a rook, if nothing else. So here we can immediately actually put a rook on the 7th, and this is pretty crushing. By this stage, the position's actually really crushing, actually. Rook c7 is crushing, it's given us as +7. Just to show this, rook c7, what does black do? Bishop d8, the game's virtually lost here. Bishop takes g6. If bishop takes here, queen takes f6, black's crumbling. What does black do here? Queen a3. Queen takes f7 as a mate in 2. So black's busted here. If his best is this, queen c5. We can take here. Bishop f5. This just gets crushing. This position here is absolutely crushing. It's just yes. There's even more clear-cut continuations. We can just take the rook. But anyway, yeah, it's a crushing position already. But instead of rook c7, rook b1 was played. That's also good to get a rook here on the 7th. So kick the queen. Queen takes a2. And after rook takes b7, actually, Addison felt this position was totally lost and resigned here at move 24. Okay, let's see this position. If bishop d8, bishop takes is crushing. If we take here, knight takes. Now if king here, it's a forced mate in 2. We've got knight h7 check, double check. Now if king g8, we've got queen f8 checkmate. Okay. King g8, there's queen f8. If king e8, then here the queen's on f7, so avoid that. We actually play queen c6 checkmate. The knight's holding f8. So this rook on the 7th, although there's no pawns to mop up, it's black's king that's being executed here with this rook on the 7th. But also, you know, it has to be noted, I mean, it was so crushing by this stage, rook c7 would do as well. But this is very convincing. After bishop d8, we just play bishop takes g6. Yeah, I mean, what does black actually do? His rook's just dead out of the game. He never got a game. Black never got a game. The opening was like a huge handicap. It doesn't matter if it was Kasparov playing that opening with black or whatever. It was just a huge, gigantic handicap. So, yeah. We're threatening mate here. It's disgusting, isn't it? So the whole game was but the way Fischer played it, you know, he didn't mind going 2 pawns down, and he didn't mind sacrificing the exchange. So maybe a lesser player here would have just thought this position was good enough with knight takes d5, when in fact there's some fight left here, and the evaluation actually at this point, if the exchange sack wasn't played is less than half a pawn. That is a massive difference. Less than half a pawn here. Rook d8. There's nothing actually that clear cut now. This position, where black might see quite a few more moves and have a little bit of a fight left, as an example. So the way it was played is crushing this idea of sacrificing the exchange here. You see there is a big difference of a rook coming to the 7th rank at either b7 or c7 as an entry point in this variation. The rook's definitely coming to the 7th. If black didn't play queen takes b2, I mean say queen d8, rook c7 again, you know, so what? Bishop d6, rook d7, it's horrible. And also you might think, well, what about this, couldn't he also have done knight c7 check? I think this is actually good for white as well. If we kick the queen first, and now the queen's attacked, so we're going to take here. We can win a rook, but there's still a bit of play left in the position after winning the rook. But yeah, it was so much more incisive the way it was played. Rook takes d5. It's absolutely end of game spelt out. So much so that black just resigned. So that was round 3. Now round 4 does have another rook on the 7th. So would anyone like to see round 4 today? Was this session too long? I think I can manage it just about, if there's interest. Or we can carry on round 4 next week. So round 4 this week, I could just about manage it. I have prepared round 4. I didn't know it would take this long to get these 3 games, but I wanted to go in some detail on them. Who would like to see round 4? Oh, let's go for it. It wasn't a game more than 40 moves, which makes it less of a marathon to go over. But remember this theme about rook on the 7th, because I'm convinced it's a pattern. It's a very useful pattern. So this one was against Miroslav Filip in round 4. So this was the 13th of November 1970. Palma de Mallorca, Interzonal, b3, believe it or not. Fischer played b3. Very versatile in his openings. d5, bishop b2, knight f6, knight f3. So white has a good dark square grip. e6, and he double fianchetto, g3, bishop g2, black castles, both sides castle, c5. White plays now c4, and we see knight c6 being played. C takes d5, knight takes d5, and there's actually a very mysterious thing about this game. I was actually reading one of my bedside books, The Unknown Capablanca, last night, and there's an isolated queen's pawn position which is remarkably similar to this game. And it was said like Capablanca was the pioneer in the pioneer for playing against isolated queen's pawns. And I'm really reminded of this game actually. As we'll see, there's going to be an isolated queen's pawn. Sorry for killing the tension there. Knight c3, bishop f6, queen c1. So knight takes d5 looks interesting now. b6, knight takes d5. And black plays e takes, and now we see d4. Has white got anything out of this opening at all? Well, there's some annoying pressure here. If black tries to simplify, let's just have a quick look at simplify. Black played bishop a6, which is probably one of the strongest moves on the board. Black doesn't really want to do this. Just take care. We can take here, and this position looks pleasant enough for white. Alright, so bishop a6 was played. Rook e1. And now black did take on d4. But we end up with this isolated queen's pawn position nevertheless. Potentially. Once white collects this pawn, we've got an isolated queen's pawn. So queen a3 hitting the bishop. Bishop goes there. Rook ad1. And this looks like this Capablanca game I'd stumbled on last night, funny enough. So bishop e7 hitting the queen. The queen goes to a4. So white's going to collect this pawn soon. Queen e8, looking at the queen again. Queen takes d4. Rook c8. Okay. We see queen f4. Now, an infiltration here with rook c2. Is that good? I think it's okay. It's about equal apparently. Rook d2 should be okay for white. We're still looking forward to torture the isolated queen's pawn here, even if a rook infiltration. It wasn't played immediately. We have bishop f6. Knight d4. Nice blockade. Bishop e5. Queen goes to e3. Now we see g6. Interesting move here. Interesting move. Engine suggests queen d3 or queen d2. Actually, Fischer played knight b5, which threatens, it seems, knight takes a7, of course, and bishop takes d5. Apparently, black, and here we take here, which is the game continuation. Apparently, black might have tried rook c5. If knight takes there, whoa. What does black play here if knight takes a7? And why is this crushing? Ah, yeah, hang on. It's a loose knight here. Can anyone see why knight takes a7 is losing for white here? So black to play. Why is this horrible for white? If I give you 20 seconds here. No, okay, no. Yeah, Mac, yeah, if rook a5, I think we just take on b6. Yeah? d4 is really crushing here, because we've got this idea of checking soon. So say here we take on g2, and then we play check and we exterminate that pesky knight. So it seems technically black was able to play rook c5 here. There's a technical note about this game you may not have seen before. So exclusive exclusive analysis. You might not have seen rook c5. You might not have seen this game before. Sorry, yeah. Okay, rook c5 was possible, but black plays instead for a miserable isolated queen's pawn position, which is strategically dead. So queen takes b5, queen takes e5. Okay, so this looks as though it's potentially strategically dead, or is black going to get some rook activity or something? Rook fe8. We see queen b2. White has a solid advantage here. He's stopping the entry point. If black had tried to use the entry point here, well, we can win this pawn, and we're threatening taking and winning the queen. So with that idea, so okay, rook fe8, queen b2. Yeah, it looks a bit dead, the position. Rook c5, and we see this move h4. So he's using Smyslov idea from the earlier rounds that the queen's good on the fianchetto for mating on g7. Okay, so rook ec8. Now here, yes, it looks as though this infiltration is annoying, and it's parried in advance with rook d2. Actually, there seems to be an idea that h5 is possible. If rook c2, not queen f6, because there's queen c6, but queen a3, and I don't know, this dark square thing might be actually quite useful. Let's have a look. a6, queen e7. If the bishop moves, queen f6 here, this is ridiculous. Why would the bishop move there? If here, queen h4. Idea, I don't know. Okay, it's interesting anyway. h5 seems interesting as well. Okay, but rook d2 was played. Let's just play for the Icelandic queen's pawn. Rook c3, and just ganging up to win this pawn. Queen c5. White could have just taken the pawn here apparently, without too much penalty. He plays b4, and now fixes the pawn before taking it. Just fixes it down, so he's going to be taking that at leisure. Black plays h5. And I think the pawn can still be taken here without any major penalty. I'm probably concerned about the a2 pawn slightly. Let's have a quick look at that. He plays actually a3. I guess there's some idea that a2 is vulnerable. If takes. If rook c2 here, rook d8 is possible. We've got this diagonal. Takes. Is this position that winnable? I'm not entirely sure. It'll be a difficult grind. So anyway, a3 was played. So he just wants to win that pawn without losing, without inviting rook c2 necessarily. So king h7. Now he finally takes the pawn. Bishop takes d5. Takes. Now here, black played queen e4. So maybe with queen f3, this looks a bit menacing. If black had played rook c2, this can be answered with queen e5 in any case. And that pawn's useful there. Okay. So queen e5, this looks okay for white. Queen e5. Or even rook d7 is okay. Okay, so queen e4, rook d8. So black's got to be careful about not being mated now on h8. Queen f3, and now we see king h2. So any rook c2 is a mate in one, yeah? We see black playing rook 8 to c4, and almost there's almost an idea of an aggressive move here from black. If white's not careful, g5 might be on the cards, but white puts the pressure on here. In fact, g5 is played here. Yes, this is dangerous. This is already pretty bad actually for black. But he played g5 here, and the position is going out of control. It's actually it's disastrous, this position after g5, but it's already gone pear-shaped quite badly actually after this move. As an example, rook c8, right, b5. This is just better for white. There's a lot of pressure here, and okay, is white running black out of moves? I just want to check this position. This position here, white. Okay, I think g5 helped black's demise actually, because this position is not so easy to crack. It seems there might not be an easy crack here, but the way black played it, he just collapses really quickly. In this position, black played the move g5, which simply allows rook f8. It's just missed that threat of rook f8. At least with rook c8 here, this is probably the best move to stop that rook f8. But yeah, g5 collapses quickly. There's a rook f8. We see king g6, check. Rook takes g5, yeah, just winning pawns. Pawn after pawn. There's also this one, check. So rook c8, rook d5, it's all gone. It's gone. Here, rook df5, and black resigned on move 40. Yeah, so black was, he's had a positional disadvantage. If we review this game, he had a positional disadvantage. I remember seeing Kramnik playing this sort of double fianchetto at the London Classic a couple of years ago. It's quite a dangerous system, but white has a definite positional advantage with the isolated queen's pawn. Black misses an opportunity for rook c5. Okay, here it's as though it might not be a big deal. If black had retained the dark square bishop, it might not have been such a big deal. But it seems to be very, very dead in this game continuation, in principle. This position here looks a little bit on the dead side, where white's just ganging up on d5. White prepares that capture on d5 without any problem. Queen e4, I don't know, black is just crumbling off this rook invasion. King h2, was that actually addressing any sort of threat? I'm not entirely sure. King h2, how necessary was king h2? Okay, king h2, we have this as though g5 is on the cards. But after this, yeah, white is actually threatening this. So rook c8 would have been the key test in this game. If white could crack this position. But yeah, he just crumbled. He just played this and it's just totally, it's just gone. Okay, yeah, I hope you got something from these games. Anyway, so it's all, I mean, for me, it is often about finesses and specific tactical variations. They make all the difference to the positional play, really. So I hope you got something out of that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Okay, thanks very much. See you next week.